afternoon and welcome to this session, which is Bridging Global and Local Perspectives, integrating artisanal mining as key for the energy transition. Thank you very much for coming to this last meeting today, and for those who've only come for this session and in the conference, it'll be well worth it. It looks like we have an intimate group this afternoon, which means that there'll be high audience participation, but we'll expect you to participate throughout. My name is Ashton Stewart Carter, and we're co-organising this session with the Paris Peace Forum. I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Cobalt Alliance and founder and CEO of the Impact Facility, and we've been working with, I've been personally working in small-scale mining for about 30 years, but these organisations work directly with small-scale mining, as do the organisations represented by the panellists, who I'll be introducing in just a minute. Perhaps to get started, it occurred to me that although I have been working, I think I went down my first artisanal mine in the mid-90s, it might be something which is quite new to some of you. So could I do a quick poll? How many people in the audience have actually been down or been to a small-scale mining operation? So relatively small amount. How many have been to a large-scale mine operation? Oh, everybody's been. Well, actually about half, so very small. So a note to ourselves on the panel, this is a group which doesn't perhaps know or is familiar with artisanal mining as we are. So maybe a good place to start actually is describe what artisanal small-scale mining is very, very quickly. In some ways you could say it's mining, but it's smaller. But really what we're talking about here is lower levels of mechanization. So at the most basic level, which people generally call artisanal mining, these are folk who are digging for minerals with picks and shovels and without any mechanization at all. Small-scale mining is sort of like one step up, and they have got some basic mechanization in the mines. And another thing that people grade small-scale mining, artisanal small-scale mining by, is how formal or informal or legal they are as well. And generally, people will refer to artisanal mining as being informal, and that's why you'll hear the forces who are trying to professionalize or formalize small-scale mining. And that, of course, is very different to the large-scale mining that some of you might have seen yesterday, when modern mines can be, 70 or 80% automated. And so even people in trucks don't exist because there's people controlling them with a joystick from a control tower. And so you do have this juxtaposition of artisanal mining and this highly automated industrial mining. So the big question today that our panels are going to answer for us comprehensively and definitively is, how do we integrate artisanal small-scale mining into this global formal economy, and in particular into the the mineral transition, the transition mineral economy. And I think perhaps one of the first places to start is, why are small-scale miners, artisanal miners, being excluded in the first place? And really just to sort of give one insight into that, if I could, and maybe this will be addressed by the panelists as we go along too, I want to talk about, very quickly, about risk. And we've heard a lot on the panels today about risk, and we've heard a lot about de-risking. The action is to de-risk the mineral sector so that it can be invested in. But if you look at some of these regulations and standards that have been put in place in the name of de-risking, what you'll see is they have excluded artisanal mining as a category. So it won't just come up as human rights and small-scale mining, it'll come up as small-scale mining full stop. So what this does, of course, is categorize a whole sector, a whole segment of the mineral supply chain in some of those critical minerals like tin and cobalt and gold, and it makes them allergic to them, if you want. And I think someone called it today hysterical fear of what's in the mineral supply chain, and the artisanal mining is that. But if we think about risk, to me, you can really only have a conversation about risk if you have people in the room who are experiencing the negative effects of that, and that's the small-scale miners themselves. When we talk about risk generally here, we're talking about reputation risk and compliance risk. When artisanal miners are talking about risk, they're talking about risk to their life and limb, occupational health and safety. And also, if it's excluded because of the compliance risk, there's also the fallout from their livelihoods as well. So small-scale mining directly employs between 45 and 50 million people. So if you look at that in dependencies, that's 250 million people globally. That's quite a few. In Africa, it's the second largest employer after agriculture. And generally, even artisanal and small-scale mining is higher paid than some of the public services, the public service jobs that you could get if you were even able to get a job. So if we push down this road of de-risking, categorizing ASM, we exclude it potentially from the flows of financing that they could get to improve their practices, and we look to depriving people of a livelihood. So really, I think the question, going back to the big question, which I'll start with our panelists, is how do we actually integrate then the small-scale mining sector, given the perception and the reality of small-scale mining as it exists currently? So to help answer these questions, we have four excellent panelists. On my left here is Emmanuel Mali-Makumba, who works with the ICGLR, which has made an enormous contribution to governance in the Great Lakes region. And first question I'll ask him is to give a little synopsis of what the ICGLR does and has done. We have to his left Chuge Agahi, who's working a lot with the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, but now also looking at traceability in mineral supply chains. Online, we have Monica, who very much looking forward to hearing from her because she represents an organization, Women in Mining in Kenya. We'll hear from her, I think, how women in particular have sometimes the most severe negative experiences from this atmosphere of exclusion. And then finally, Guillaume Debria, who works for EPIS, which has done, I think I've known for about 15 years or so, which has done some tremendous work in the Great Lakes region as well, and globally on human rights and mapping. So, Manny, maybe I could turn first to you to talk a little bit. Maybe first we'll just explain a little bit what the ICGLR does, and then reflect on what are the challenges then to incorporate or integrate ASM into the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much, moderator. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for inviting ICGLR to be here. ICGLR stands for International Conference on the Great Lakes Region. It is a 12-member state multilateral organization which was set up in the early 2000s, looking at the conflict which was going on in the Great Lakes region, mainly in the DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi. And it was felt then that the conflict had a regional dimension and was driven by regional issues, and the solution had to come from the region itself. So the African Union, working with the United Nations, set up the Great Lakes Conference as a hub for dialogue, a hub for mediation, a hub to look into the roots which are leading to the conflict and ending conflict. And one of the issues which was discovered, apart from the ethnic lines pushing the conflict, we also had the issue of minerals. The Great Lakes region, unfortunately, is the hub of most of the minerals we talk about, which are critical for the transition. But at the same time, it's a hub of people living in poverty. So that paradox and situation has to date perpetuated the ever-ending conflict in the region. So coming to the topic, why then was it seen that minerals were driving the conflict? First of all, the Great Lakes region, because of historical setup and its ever-ending wars, it has been very difficult for member states to formalize the SMEs. They have to date existed as many informal, and most member states, you notice that have failed to set up a legal system which integrates them. And because of that, governments are not able to protect property rights. They're not able to guarantee safety and offer opportunities for the small-scale and artisanal miners to grow. So the barriers we're talking about are limited legal systems, limited institutions to regulate, to monitor, to oversee the sector. And that also reinforces into the inability for them to integrate into the economic system. So they are out of the peripheral. The SMEs, in their nature, provide alternative livelihoods, second to agriculture. And you notice that in off seasons, when we have no rain or anything, people go into artisanal. But they remain informal, they remain out of the system, they do not pay tax. And because of that, there is inability from the state to guarantee opportunities for growth, to guarantee, to train them in how to save, to help them with setting up business bankable solutions. And that has left the sector with a high risk. They could not borrow formally. So this whole challenge leaves them at the mercy of working with, in our region, working with groups who are able to provide equipment in exchange for minerals, for them to buy guns for the negative forces, equipment, and hence the conflict goes on. So our work as ICGRA mainly is to safeguard lives today and not to wait for tomorrow. It is today because SAMs, if they're not managed very well, if they're not regulated very well, they are at the risk of funding or helping to fund the escalation of wars in the region. So as we speak now, there's war in South Sudan, in Sudan, there's war in DRC, Kivu and South Kivu, and those are the rich parts of the DRC. That's where the minerals are. That's where the routes going for other countries for export are. And that's where you find that most of the SMEs are there. That's where the negative forces are. So the link for us as ICGRA, the link between the work of the SMEs and the work of the negative forces are very much, it's a positive relationship. And our work is to mitigate that. And hence, we engage governments to ensure that they put in place proper rules of engagement. They put in place, we have a model law for SME integration, which we share with the 12 member states to implement. Thank you very much.
And just to be clear, you're not saying that artisanal mining should be excluded from the work of the ICGLR, and I guess a corollary there, when you, and you're not saying that they are automatically illegal, but there could be a path towards formality, is that?
Yes, our message is not to say we do away with the SM. No. It's to say let us formalize them. Let us help them with the required skills, the required opportunities for clean markets. And above all, our message has been that we should ensure that there is value addition and beneficiation, because employment is also a drive to conflict. And employment is also what we are seeing, that most of the youth are surviving the Mediterranean for greener pastures up there. Shifting the problem from the Great Lakes region to Europe. We'll reach that story later, but there is an opportunity of making the youth, the women and children, have decent work through SMEs if they are integrated into the economic system, and if you put the right legal structure for them to operate in. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I'm hearing that ASM can be legitimate, and what we've got to do is enable their path to more kind of formal legal structures. Diogo, you've worked a lot on EITI, and EITI was set up to have transparency in governments, but it's expanded its remit to include the private sector as well, and generally it is a force for good. Is it a force for good for ASM? Is transparency a force for good for ASM? You could say that when a supply chain is transparent and ASM is revealed, then many actors run away from engaging, and has been a negative force, but tell me I'm wrong.
Well, first and foremost, I would say it's a force for better. Let's start there. And to say that there is no substitute for good governance, transparency, and accountability in the extractive sector, and much more in the artisanal and small-scale mining sector. You mentioned the EITI. Of course, we have the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, but we have a plethora of other governance structures that are active in the extractive and ASM sector. We have our colleagues, I met some colleagues from Botswana, and there we have the Kimberley process. We also have the OECD framework on responsible mineral supply chains. So we don't lack governance structures. What we lack is policy implementation of such structures. There seems to still be a huge gap in this. We look at gaps in issues relating to contract transparency, issues relating to implementing text, as my colleague here from the ICLGR has talked already about, legal frameworks. So how many countries that have abundance of ASM resources actually have ASM in their mining codes, and how many actually implement these? Are there processes to support capacity building for miners within the ASM sector to be aware of the legal frameworks and their rights in extraction of minerals? So this issue of ASM, first and foremost, we have to start with legal frameworks, including them in the legal frameworks and in the planning of the government in the national development plans, especially now with the boom of critical minerals going forward. What would be important is to not make the same mistake when we talk about domestic resource mobilization and leveraging ASM not just for good and for towards sustainable development, but also for domestic resource mobilization, which can support sustainable development in that way. So we first talked about the legal framework. The second is putting together cooperatives, because right now we do have ASM miners who basically just exchange. You have people coming from different parts of the world coming into a mine from different countries, and they pay ASM miners to go in, take out gold, take out tin, take out any mineral they can get their hands on, and exchange equipment or money. We even have, today, farmers that are switching resources. So we have land use change, where because of climate change and because of limited agricultural production, they're switching to ASM. And for those who are not really familiar with ASM, with the limited legal framework surrounding this, then we have an abuse of environmental and social standards. We have even issues of washing of minerals, which is very basic, done with mercury, and what is the impact of this downstream on food and on agriculture later down the line. So there are so many challenges that we see that we need to formalize, we need to legalize this. And cooperatives can help, first and foremost, with giving them information, tools, frameworks that they can operate in a sustainable way, and also being able to get the benefit from this sector. The issue now, and we've talked about value addition, and value addition has come up a lot in the conversations of today. So we have multiple countries producing. We have Guinea, which is known for bauxite, but they don't produce aluminium. The bauxite is taken, and there's a clear pathway for the helicopter to land, take the bauxite, and take it out. We have the same in DRC for a lot of cobalt, for a lot of the minerals. So why can't we integrate some sort of value addition, even as first stage, on the continent to reinvest the revenue from the ASM sector to make sure that this is more sustainable? And the final point regarding this is, as we've talked about, regarding women and children who are active in the sector. There's a link here between protecting the rights, human rights of women and children, and also education, because we see that a lot in a couple of ASM sites that we have worked on, abuse of the rights of children and women in those sectors that are not getting an education because they are really invested in ASM sites. This is an issue that we have to face and we have to look at critically. So the existence of governance structures does not necessarily mean that governance is being followed. And a lot of ASM sites are located on the peripheries of a lot of countries, so with limited government presence. When we talk about ASM resources being used to finance terrorism, this is a real context that is fueling conflict today as we speak. So we have countries like Mali, like Burkina Faso, where during my time at the EITI, we pushed back on local mining development funds that should be used to develop schools, to develop healthcare facilities, now being transitioned to fund national security. And we can ask ourselves what national security means on the periphery of the countries. So this is something we have to critically look at. Form cooperatives in cases where the government arm cannot reach the periphery, but also make it de-incentivize the issue of less value addition. So create value within the country so that the revenue stays in the country and can be used to develop sustainable means of extraction.
Great, thanks. And both you and Manny mentioned kind of conflict in the context of ASM. Well, I've always looked at this as that the artisanal mining doesn't cause the conflict, but it enables conflict where it is. Would you agree with that? Just to clarify that point for the audience.
It enables the conflict and it provides the revenues for the conflict in that sense.
But in some ways, the term kind of conflict minerals implies that it was the minerals which caused the conflict in the first place, but in fact, it's not quite the case. That's great. Oh, good, Monica. I can see you now. I was worried you weren't there. Good to see you again. Just a nice segue there from the remarks that Chiogo made about women and children. Remind us again why artisanal mining is so important for some of these communities in Africa with the choices that they have, and in particular, how women are engaged in artisanal mining. Chiogo mentioned in particular the washing, and I think we'll hear from you that kind of washing is where the women spend most of the time and where it can be most dangerous. But yeah, please paint a picture for us about how women are engaged in artisanal mining.
Thank you, Ashton, and thank you to the other panelists. I hope you can clearly hear me. And I agree with the sentiments already raised. We have an association called the Association of Women in Mining in Africa, which was formed as an appreciation of the issues and challenges that women in artisanal and small-scale mining are facing. There's already existing gender inequality in the mining value chain, both in LSM and in ASM, that is in large-scale mining and in small-scale, artisanal and small-scale mining. 30% of the practitioners in artisanal and small-scale mining are actually women. But the gender inequality that exists in ASM has to be brought to light. So there are a lot of issues that women contend with, and these issues tend to be legal issues, which have been highlighted by both the other speakers on the legal and regulatory frameworks, wearing a gender lens in terms of legal, the laws and the policies, and where women participate. But there's also the economic and social issues also for the women. Economic in terms of the kind of patriarchal arrangements in terms of owning the production factors in ASM, the land issues, land rights, most land ownership, especially in the African context, land is owned mainly by the male counterparts, which then essentially means that women are also not owners of the shafts and the production of these minerals, and most of them tend to be casual laborers at ASM sites. And as casual laborers, as you've heard, there's the washing of ore, there's a crushing, grinding, processing, mainly done without any protective gear. These are minerals they hold by their hands, they wash using mercury. In the case of gold, you will not find them wearing any helmets, any gloves, any masks to protect themselves from the dust when they're crushing this ore. So they tend to be exposed to a lot of health hazards on at these sites. These women also tend to bring their kids to this site because of lack of social protections around these sites. So there's no childcare facilities where the young ones are left. So they're carried on to these ASM sites. And this brings up the issue of child labor as well. Not necessarily the kids all of them work on the sites or are brought to work on the sites. Some of them come along and tag along with their mothers, exposing them to the hazards at these ASM sites. So over and above the economic issues that force these women to come to the ASM sites, because some of them tend to be breadwinners, some of them are coming to substitute incomes in their homes at home, so they have to work to support livelihoods at home. So this, them bringing their kids along brings the issue of children rights and children working in ASM sites. And then also that also calls upon the issue of the social protections that have to come along with the number of women on these ASM sites. There's the issue of gender-based violence that also arises from these ASM sites, the informality. For those who have seen from the poll that Ashton has briefly done, maybe most of you have not been to an ASM site, to appreciate the level of informality. The remoteness of these sites have already been mentioned. So in the case of social protections, there are cases of gender-based violence that happens, and you'll appreciate this given the informality, the numbers involved, and the lack of governance structures that have already been mentioned, and access to some of these government services and facilities. So when issues of gender-based violence come up, these women, there are no reporting centers. And some of the perpetrators of some of this gender-based violence are the officers who are supposed to be mitigating some of these occurrences from happening. So there are many issues that women in ASM have to contend with. And if the call upon this transitions that we are talking about is an appreciation of existing issues, the gender inequality that currently exists in ASM space. So the urgency with which the sourcing for these green minerals is being perpetuated, and the sort of negotiations and collaborations that are being forged towards sourcing for these transitional minerals, we have to be careful that they do not exacerbate these existing gender inequalities and these existing issues that women in the ASM are already facing. And we need to be careful to wear a gender lens when we're talking about these transitions to ensure that as we are addressing the sourcing and inclusion of ASM as significant producers of these critical minerals, that we do not then sort of expand these gender gaps, and we are careful to ensure that women do not then end up being casualties of the urgency in sourcing for these critical minerals.
Great, thanks so much, Monica. So, Guillaume, we've heard that artisanal mining in Africa is linked to occupational health and safe problems, unsafe working, gender inequalities, conflict and governance problems, illegality and legal flow of finance. But on the other hand, we've heard that it employs a great many people and it's important for their livelihood. So from a policy point of view, and with the title of this conference in mind, the just transition, how do we ensure that we don't exclude the very people that we should be including as we transition to clean energy?
Yeah, thanks for the floor. So before to see how we can improve our policies, I just wanted to and a bit come back to what you were saying, and in 1 minute making the history of all the conflict minerals rules that exist, but I'll stick to only two, the most important one. So there are two very important regulations about traceability and conflict minerals. The first one is the Dodd-Frank Act. It was voted in 2010, and very basically it says that every company that wants to sell products in the US have to declare if they have Congolese minerals in their products. And the issue when they made this, it really came out of nowhere. The Dodd-Frank Act is actually about Wall Street laws, and all of a sudden they add this conflict mineral section, it was section 1502 in the Dodd-Frank. And when you do this, what's happening is when they heard about this how can I say it was the consequences, or thanks to extremely efficient campaigns that were simplifying the conflict in Congo. And it was really Hollywood stars and Paris Hilton or those kind of stars, to be nice, who were explaining a bit, the message was when you buy a phone, when you buy a computer, you're actually promoting rapes in DRC. Absolutely not helpful. You have the people on the ground, all civil society organization in Congo saying like, look, if you do this now, it's going to be an economic collapse because we're not ready. We have 100,000 people working in this, we all agree, terrible conditions. You have to be brave to be a miner. We all agree on those things. But those people work to eat, and if they don't work, they won't eat. So you will have the economic catastrophe that you were thinking, that we are telling you. But it didn't pass the message. Even private sector came out and said, look, for us, on certain products, because we're talking about transitions, but not all the minerals are criticals. And in the Congo, for example, there is for us, it's easier to make a Congo-free product than to make a conflict-free product. So in those conditions, we're just going to go somewhere else. We're going to Canada, to Australia to have it. So what the CSOs said was exactly what happened. You had an economic collapse, and I was there in 2010. I was making actually a movie about the Dodd-Frank Act. And we have interviewed Raya Mutomboki's armed groups in Eastern Congo. And I can tell you, all of them were former miners, or some were taxi drivers driving the miners to the mines. And basically they said, well, as soon as the law passed, there was a de facto embargo. No one wanted to buy our minerals. So we simply stopped working and we took the weapons, and officially it's to fight Rwandan's fighters, but it's really a way to survive that they took the weapons. So here we have really a top-down policies taken from DC. The European Union has voted in 2017 the EU regulations on conflict minerals. They really want to learn from the Americans, so they try not to focus on Congo. They say it's going to be about all around the world. The issue here is it is really shy. In Congo, no one has ever heard of this policy. I went again last year in Kolwezi, so that's more where we have the cobalt. And we gathered civil society organizations, the mining cooperatives, the local authorities. No one has ever heard of this law. In 2021, we actually wrote a report with EPIS about the results of those laws. It hasn't any single result because the smuggling is still happening. The violence around mining site has not stopped because there was no implementation at all. It was just thought all of the blue we should do better work, but there was no money and no investment in making this. And so you have in both cases also is a thought of DC and a thought of in Europe of how we should do and what do we have to do. But there's not a single involvement of civil society organizations, and more importantly, local civil society organization thinking for the local populations. So also those laws and regulations, it's all about sticks, but there's no carrot, and that's maybe the most important. And I know it's also the most difficult is to find an incentive for miners to actually follow the formalized lines. It's really difficult to find, and once we have found this, we will have the solutions, but no one has found that. But incentive for miners to go for the formalizations and for the where it's traceable, that's the most important things. And I want just to finish, that's my last point, because I've been bashing the Americans and the Europeans, but also if those laws, and at least there are good intentions, and that's we should not forget, there are good intentions, and if those things happen, it's because it is true that you have illegal mining, or unofficial mining, and you have no traceability. But one of the main sources of conflict that we have seen in EPIS, and we have visited now 3,000 mines in the last 10 years, but one of the very cause of those conflicts, and very local conflicts that we don't speak, it's when you have the presence of Chinese companies coming illegally who have corrupted local chiefs or provincial officials, and they take the lands of Azul miners. And that's actually how you have a conflict that starts, and you have issues, and Congolese fighting between two different chefferies because one is not earning the money. You have multiple local root causes. But so those Chinese companies, no one is taking action against them. The government of China is not going after them. The government of Congo is not doing anything against them. So it's also, many actors are in fault. Thank you.
Thanks. And my organisation actually did a piece of work for the EU Commission on the Conflict Minerals Act, and indeed found that in the DRC and other countries such as Colombia, which are deemed to be CARAs, conflict-affected high-risk areas, they've not heard of the law. So the reflection is that this is a law which is there to protect the EU companies, but not really to drive out conflict or address development problems. But you said that you highlighted some of the problems, but what's the policy change? What's one thing you can do perhaps to create an incentive to bring the artisanal mining into the formal economy? Yes, 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's not an easy answer, but also about the carrots, maybe that's why you want to hear, you just have to ask also the miners, and what they ask is investment. What you need to do is just to invest in them and to give them the capacity to sell and to sell to you, and if you buy from them, they actually have a revenue. But maybe I can elaborate that later, but investment would be the key answer.
Perfect segue. So Monica, I don't know if you're still on the line, I can't see you, I can only see your name. If I go in reverse order now, talking about these policy improvements or policy innovations that we would recommend, you worked, I think, at the Chamber of Mines and advised the Ministry of Mines in Kenya. What would you advise them now to take the next step in integrating artisanal mining into the Kenyan formal economy, mining economy?
Yeah. So in terms of policy interventions, I think that one of the issues that has kept people away from involving and dealing with artisanal miners has always been their informality. And because of the informality and law and they've not been legalized, then perceptions of that illegality has kept actors who would otherwise have wanted to work with ASM, support ASM, and have interventions with the ASM sector away because of the perceived illegality of the activities. So in terms of laws and policies should support the legalization of the ASM sector so that they're then, they're viewed as being legal actors included in the, rightfully included in the minerals value chain, and their contribution noted and appreciated. And legalization of ASM's motivation by government should not just be to be able to collect royalties from them and other taxes, but to actually support the ASM sector to increase production and to also ensure their protection in terms of occupational health and safety issues in their operations. So what my fellow panelists has noted as well, what ASM always asks for is access to financing, support to access financing so that they can increase production, so that they can formalize and professionalize their activities. So for them to be able to access this financing then, if the laws support their legality and they're well structured and their governance issue and they're well governed, then it will be easier to be able to have conversations of the models that could be set up to be able to channel financing and how to lobby financial institutions and other lenders to come into this space and craft nuanced ways in which we can finance the ASM sector so that they stop being perceived and viewing the activities always as a poverty-driven activity, but become entrepreneurs of an opportunity. So policies that support legality that then supports that they are able to access financing, they are able to professionalize their operations, and then also because of how they've been properly organized and the governance that has been put in place, access to markets also becomes easier. And so rightfully then they become included and fair participants, participate fairly in the mining value chains. And I think if most governments looked at ASM as controllable and not uncontrollable, then they would be able to ensure the policies that they put in place then support the professionalization of this subsector.
Perfect, yes, and of course Kenya is a leader in this, as you and I know, because through the impact facility, we've been investing into small-scale mines as entrepreneurs for the last 4 years, and now we can show that they are returning their funds, so they are actually becoming bankable entrepreneurs. Monica also mentioned the access to market, Diogo, and I know you've been doing some work on the gold sector and looking at traceability. The LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association, which sets the trading price and quality for gold, globally now has 2% of their gold coming from small-scale miners, looking to double that. How much do you think this traceability and access to markets is a key part in incentivizing small-scale miners?
Okay, so traceability is of utmost importance, and this is something I've taken it on myself to keep preaching, because when we are using final products, we do not know where the raw material comes from gold to diamond, you name whichever mineral or resource you're using. Now, and I've worked again in the Sahel region where worked on Burkina Faso and in Mali. So I've shared two stories with different people. First and foremost, we know that in Burkina Faso in 2022, we had 2 coups. So 2 military coups where there was a change in government. And this change also destabilizes the region, which leads to some sort of confusion within the ASM sector, and this gives a gap where the resources can be taken out, and the revenues don't come back to the country. So with traceability, what we are working on doing, first and foremost, is working with ASM miners, so right now in Burkina Faso, but also in Mali, partly in Kenya, and in Nigeria as well, first and foremost to have environmental and social impact assessment, to have labeling, but the issue right now we're facing is digitalization of ASM resources and how to trace this. This is a big issue that we face when we connect ASM miners to final users. And I think with the TDI, there's a lot of work going on this. With that being said, we also have the issue where for ASM miners, they believe that traceability that's not their primary priority. They don't really, how we trace where minerals come from is not their first and foremost priority. Of course, it's an issue of poverty, and that's why people enter this region, this sector. So what we've worked on is working with cooperatives that have bankable certification schemes that we can actually have these cooperatives with the ASM miners involved have a certification program where we can then trace. This is a bit more structured in that even with the certification schemes that we have, we can tell from which mine or which miners have been involved in a particular mine, what are the health and safety regulations that have been put in place. And eventually, we hope that this can be followed up the chain. But this is a link that we still haven't done yet, and we're hoping to work on in the future. But just to come back on an issue of contract transparency and data, right now, I'm happy that there's more and more data coming out in the ASM sector, but this is a sector that is not monitored, and we need more. First and foremost, data on the miners that are in the sector, and the volumes and the values of goods that leave the country in this case, because that is how we can put a value on how much we can invest and what is important to invest. The final point on contract transparency is a lot of countries that we've mentioned, legal framework, they have very complex mining codes that are very, very old, and updating it in a bureaucratic country with a lot of political conflict can be very difficult. If we come down to the mining sector, again, some of them don't even mention ASM in their mining codes, not to talk of implementing texts that can be used to break down mining to the community level. So these are things that we have to look at, break down those barriers where artisanal miners can actually apply for a license without having really difficult technical and financial criteria the hurdles which they have to pass to be able to get a license. Because that is the only way the government can keep track to some extent of what is going on. If the government has an idea of which geographical area is being looked at, which miners are involved, how much is under the ground, then we can start documenting and being able to trace from the mine to the final destination how this happens.
And Manny, the ICGLR has put in place many procedures, protocols, policies which have worked. Can you give us some kind of practical examples of those and how they might apply to the artisanal mining sector? And picking up what Shogo was saying on traceability or trackability of these minerals, which also applies to industrial minerals as well, I'm curious, where have you seen this work? Because I've seen it work and I've seen it drive the trade further underground. And then who pays for that? Because there's a cost to tracing stuff, and the downstream always wants to push it upstream, but if they're artisanal miners, they might not have the same profit margins as large-scale miners.
Thank you for that difficult question. So, ICGR, working with our good, long-lasting partners, the German government, through GIZ, and also with the European Union and Impact, we have been implementing the regional initiative on natural resources, which is guided by a protocol which was signed in 2010 in Lusaka, the protocol against illegal exploitation of natural resources in the Great Lakes region. So the protocol aims to delink the financing of armed forces using natural resources, in this case 3TG, tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. One success story is that in 2010, after the signing of this protocol, the 12 member states, who are very diverse, very different, different mining codes, different historical backgrounds, signed on the 6 tools. The 6 tools are looking at regional certification, formalization of SMEs, harmonization of laws, the regional database, EITI, and also whistleblowing. One success story is actually them agreeing on a regional certificate, the ICGR certification. Yes, we have had some challenges, but now we have 5 member states. We have Burundi, DRC, Rwanda, Tanzania, and recently Uganda signed in last year, November. What does that entail? It entails that whenever exporters want to trade, they have to rely on, they have to obtain a license, a certificate from their ministries of mines. And one thing we are seeing is that the certificate is being recognized internationally and respected. We have managed to engage China on the same certificate. We have made headways. We are cooperating with them. We have engaged the Arab Emirates recently. They are also using their own, working with OECD, and working with OECD also, we have had support from that end. However, challenges still remain. It's 5 out of 12. And hence, what good thing comes from the regional certification? I think one good thing is the ability for ICGR to impose third-party audit. Third-party audits which are independent, looking at, firstly, for now, governance issues, human rights issues, child abuse, women's rights, and companies, small-scale exporters are now paying attention to that. You read that the Global Witness report brings out these issues. That shows that there's some movement. A little, but there's some movement. And it is those little things you have to build on. Right now, there's dialogue on if the model is working. How do we improve upon it? There's an issue of value addition. Should that be a tool or not? Should we remove tools which are expensive to implement, like whistleblowing, which was initially meant for civil society to utilize? That has not done very well. We tried it in the DRC. It's not very much accepted. Should we continue with that? I think for me, really, it is to reflect on these tools, to build on what is working, to rearrange, modify tools which are not moving to suit the realities on the ground. And our partners, GIZ and us, are in critical thinking around those areas, and we'll continue doing that. But there's room for political will. I think political will is there. It is the bureaucracy, mainly at member state level, the inability to grasp what these tools are meant for. And you know that in bureaucracies there's change, and with this change comes some inertia and selective forgettingness. They would like to forget this and remember this. And our role as ICGRI is to continue engaging them, advocating for these tools, pushing them to continue implementing, working with our structures on the ground. Yes, civil society has a big role, but unfortunately very few partners have come in to help them meet their mandate. But there's room for improvement, but there's a tool at a regional level which is very much acceptable, which has political will and backing. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we've had quite a broad-ranging conversation. I promise audience participation. So we've got remaining about 8 minutes left. I'd like to open it to the floor. So anybody has any questions, put your hand up. Fantastic.
Thank you. I understand that energy transition requires volumes, and the ASM sector does not have access to investment, as Monica said. So I have two questions. One is, by how much, if it did have access to investment, would that sector be, informal sector, be able to increase production by? And the second is, there may be some players in that informal ASM sector who are eager to invest, but some who are not, because it would mean getting into the formal economy and therefore paying taxes, which they famously have avoided to do until now. So these are our two questions. What's the potential increase in volume, and how many of the players would actually want to take part in that?
Who would like to take that?
John, yeah. First I'm going to answer to that question about increasing production. The thing is, we tend to forget, and it's one of the most important things. I thought we could have said that in the introduction, but the cobalt sector in DRC on its own is already 10% of the worldwide production of cobalt. Most of the coltan, it comes from Eastern Congo and Rwanda, but we're not going to that discussions, but 80% is also artisanally extracted. So it is a real source of supply chain. That's also why we've been in EPs pushing for the European Commissions when they have those CRM Act and all this. We need to find new supply chains and finding new partnerships with other countries. What we say is, artisanal mining is a supply chain that you're not investing in, and they can improve, and they can actually increase. We don't have numbers because, as we were saying, it's highly informal, so we don't have the production. But the difference, and that's an advantage actually for the ASM compared to the industrial, is that it can increase if they know that it's all about the prices. If the prices are rising, then you will have many more people working in the artisanal mining sector. Whereas, for example, if the cobalt sector the cobalt price is increasing, the companies, they're extracting copper, but they can't increase the amount of cobalt that they are extracting. But you will have, and that's actually very much the case, artisanal miners, they can go for copper as they can go for cobalt. In the Eastern Congo, when we're talking about Dodd-Frank, many of them were working the 3T, so tin, tungsten, tantalum. As soon as the law came, they went all through the gold, just because it's easier to smuggle. But my point was, you can have, artisanal miners can move, and they can go from one minerals to another.
So it's very much a function of price. If the price goes up, people go digging. But of course, then large-scale mining also increases, so the proportion might still be low, but the amount of material that they can dig up is very large. Artisanal cobalt mining is $1 billion business a year, and it supports hundreds of thousands of people. So we're talking earlier today about mineral development, minerals for development. That's also what we kind of got to consider as well. How do we ensure this is for development? But the formalization is about ensuring that it gets into the supply chains that we want it to get into. And at the moment, the barrier to entry is not meeting some of these expectations that markets want them to. But that's beginning to shift, especially in gold. There's a meeting today in London where you have a collection of African central buyers who want to buy gold from the artisanal mining sector because that's where they see that it hasn't been captured by large corporations. Any other questions? If not, I have one for Guillaume. You can be thinking about your questions. You got one?
Maybe. Very straightforward question. Maybe if you have a success story when it comes to integrating artisanal mining and how they managed to pull it off, basically.
Great question.
From the Great Lakes region, of the 12 member states, I think you find good success stories in Rwanda. Rwanda has tried to go the way of cooperatives, and there's also an incentive because they have rights conditions, business conditions. The legal system is sound. And they also have an opportunity of having refineries in Rwanda. And those refineries are actually attracting a lot of SMEs to trade and export to Rwanda because of the right price and security issues. So you find that that is what we are seeing, because even Uganda, after imposing a ban on 3TG exportation, for the last 4 years or so, that banned 5 or 4 years, they banned the exporting of raw tin, tantalum, and gold. They have now opened a refinery. So they have a refinery, and they have uplifted the. They are saying only those who process can export. So once I think once the artisanal business is integrated into the economic sphere or systems, and you have the right conditions in place, then you see levels of employment increasing, you see livelihoods improving, and that's what we're seeing in Rwanda. Not saying that everything is perfect, but there is some movement. And hence, in our approach to SMM, we are more focusing on value addition as a tool, because once the locals are able to see what value is being generated and the opportunities available for them to integrate, and the issue of not finding themselves in huge bureaucratic processes which demand them to corrupt somebody to get a license, then things move. But if corruption stops them, if they have to invest more for them to be formal, then they shun those processes. They'll rather go back to their default setting and do the things informally. So for us, the onus is on government to ensure that it creates the sound environment. It sets up the right institution to engage SMEs, to regulate them, to guide them, and at the same time to offer opportunities for finance, for capacity building, and also the protection of their property, the protection of rights, first and foremost, is key. Once that is done, then it becomes very easy for them to thrive. Without that, then they remain in this sphere where anything goes. Thank you.
Yeah, and perhaps when you respond, also maybe include some comments on the blue certification scheme and how that is a way to reduce cost and build legitimacy.
Yeah, I just wanted to, about the success stories. It's all about, if we ask our success stories, it's about, do we have projects that have managed to do something? But it's also, for a long time and before, it's artisan mining, and as we're all saying a bit, has suffered like really bad reputations in the last times. But before it was also like very routines. And when I was talking about those Raya Mutomboki, one of them was telling me that as a child he was looking for gold, And in fact, it was one of the best memories he had in his life. And it's a bit like counterintuitive what I'm saying, because we're talking about child labor, how difficult it can be, but mines can be extremely difficult, can be under tunnels, under pits, and that's where we're talking about, like bravery. But it can be, when it's about gold, it can be on a river, as you have river until your knee, and you're just looking for gold. And that was more those type of mines. But he was saying that's the best memory he had with his father, is because he was with him for the entire holidays. There were just the two of them. The other family was in the village. And he said it was the best time for my father because I felt I was important, I felt proud, and we're looking for gold. So you also have, it's not always about bringing a new project, it's just people had like a very nice life before also. So it's a deviating way to say that from your question. And sorry, your question was, about...
I think we might have run out of time to ask another question. Regret to say, but let me kind of end on a positive note. So if I give each one, the panelists, one comment, you've got 8 seconds each. If there's the one compelling thing that your projects that you're working on at the moment, your programs that you're working on at the moment to advance ASM, fast forward to 2030, what would be the change that you see in 2030 that it's so important to you that your will almost manifest its existence?
Okay. So to me, it's, as I was saying before, is first you need to invest, because artisanal mining is a business. It's not about humanitarian. It's not a development projects that you need to put. It's an investment in the supply chain that exists. And if you have to have like a positive impact on it, you need to invest in that. And by investing in this, then you can come with your own standards, and we can talk about integration of women. You can have your rules about forbidding children to go on their things. And on the Congolese side, it's all about access to land. You have to let miners to work legally, because if they work legally, they can actually reinforce their pits, and so they can work on their working conditions. And then we can actually facilitate the traceability, and so we can give them access to the global market.
Invest. Monica, what's your one thing that's going to be achieved by 2030?
Over and above a well invested in ASM sector is one where there's meaningful participation of women who have been included in the supply chain, and without child labor and fatalities happening in these mining sites.
Sure.
For me, it would be a multi-stakeholder approach where ASM companies, civil society, and government, even local government, is around the table so that the point of view of all these are included. But most specifically, we have in French, we call it the comptoir d'achat, so the purchasing house, to be able to trace this and make sure that the revenues collected are being used locally to reinvest.
The last one is always very difficult. But I think we need to leverage on already existing processes. I think the OECD framework provides that. The ICJRA protocol on natural resources provides that. We need to ensure that we reduce the cost of traceability and due diligence issues from the small scale and SMEs, and they're bearing the cost now more compared to the upstream. So we need to see how we do that. And lastly, we need to ensure that we help the South to strengthen South-to-South cooperation, and also the North to respect regional initiatives. Destination countries for 3TG are critical. We need to engage our governments in the North to ensure that exporters and importers of minerals from the region do not divert from these standards, because that leads to war and the killing of mass people, and women and children suffer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the panelists. I started on an informal poll, so I'll finish on an informal poll. So raise your hand if your opinion of artisanal mining, artisanal small-scale mining, has improved over the course of this last hour from when you first came in. Whose opinion has improved? Thank you. So that's a testament, I think, to our panel. So thank you very much for our panel, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you, everybody.